on in the agenda to a discussion the unsanctioned encampment policy. It's a presentation actually, and I guess a draft policy that we'll discuss and discuss whether or not we're going to circulate it. Lisa will take that role. I do see some others in the audience that might participate if we need that too.
Yeah, that's screen here. All right, so thank you very much. I am representing the working group for unsanctioned encampments tonight. Doing the presentation. Almost all members of the group are in the room, so appreciate their reminders or feedback should I leave anything out. So tonight we're going to talk about the policy, and we have some decision points we'd like to discuss. Before we get into the policy, I wanted to talk about how and why we made the policy and approached it the way we did. I want to give some background on how public land, city-owned property has been managed with encampments in the past, and then we'll give a policy overview. So. Okay, so the working group, this was the charge of the working group, and this policy, this draft policy really addresses primarily the first part of the charge. It is a land management policy. It is a pilot policy, and it touches upon the last part of the charge, but it primarily is about how to manage land in the face of the encampments. The working group members are on the bottom. Okay. In developing the policy, these are the resources we used. We talked to city departments, we did a survey, we asked some people to come to the group and meet with us individually, one-on-one interviews. We got a lot of feedback on, and a lot of consistent feedback from everybody really, and not everybody agreed on you got different feedback on some things, not everybody agreed, but we did get some consistent feedback that led to choices like word choices, like the word enforcement. We got very consistent feedback from everybody that whatever policy we developed should be very clear about the protocol for enforcement. We tried other words and so we landed on enforcement, but not everybody agrees on that. In addition to meeting with groups of people, we did do research and learning on our own. We looked at several policies. These are some of them. We didn't just look at, we looked at some policies we wouldn't necessarily agree with too. And we looked at policies that were, also have changed since we looked at them. So we informed ourselves about policies. We also looked at the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness Emerging Principles for Encampment Resolution, and we were very much influenced by a recent Ninth Circuit court case, Martin v. Boise, which in the end determined that camping on public land could not be criminalized if there was no other alternative. So, as I mentioned, this policy is really about the management of city land. It's not a policy about assisting and addressing the needs of unsheltered persons per se. So I just wanted to make people aware of the other things that the city is doing to that end. Here is a list of some of the things we're doing. We just recently, the IOR received a $1.2 million home ARP allocation that I think you saw last month, and specifically targeted to support a housing surge and prevent return to homelessness for vulnerable individuals. We did create the position of homeless outreach coordinator and allocated $100,000 in the 2023 budget. In May, the Town Council endorsed the Continuing Cares Home Together Tompkins plan. We do collaborate constantly with agencies and developers seeking to develop permanent supportive housing. And of course, the city contributes to the Community Housing Development Fund that provides financing for the creation of permanently supportive housing. And on the left is a picture of West End Heights, which is a very successful project that does that. Okay, so we asked ourselves this question constantly throughout the process: why do we need a land management plan regarding campus? And so here are some of the ideas that we felt that the policy addressed. So recognizing, of course, that camping on public lands is a last resort to those experiencing homelessness, this policy establishes guidance to better manage this use of city property by providing some of these things. There are probably other things as well, but I think one of the main things that is aiming to provide is a clear expectation for campers, outreach workers, city staff, creating a system of communication and tracking for working with encampments on public land, and coordinated system across city departments. And, you know, just establishing a protocol for humane relocation when it's necessary. The policy really does aim for always voluntary relocation, and as you saw in the policy, there's a 6-step process. And the other things. These are some of the benefits that the group felt that could be achieved through such a policy. So some background on current approaches to managing public land used for camping. So we have really over the years done a case-by-case approach when there are issues that arise, but we also have taken kind of consistent actions over the years. At the top is a road. We have built roads to improve emergency access both on the southwest parcel and Brindley Street. And Mike's crews have taken advantage of the seasonality of encampments. They tend to clear out in the winter months. So if the crews there's not enough snow and the crews have capacity, we take the opportunity to clean up campsites. And this is just an example of what kind of cleaning needs to be done. It can be kind of specialized. It sometimes requires cutting down trees and specialized removal due to the type and amount of it. We have done that. And what have we done when there have been conflicts between camping and public use of our city-owned property for public use and welfare? So in parks, and mostly it's just happened in parks, there is a sort of established policy that is in the policy. We just use that for cases where there's camping already, and or a campsite shows up in a park, or camper shows up in a park, or an area of other actively managed land. And we have had cases, for instance, when we built the dewatering site, and the picture on the right is a picture of the dewatering site. We built the dewatering site, and also when we were marketing the end of Cherry Street for sale, there was a long process of working with outreach workers, working with staff to notify people that they had to move because we needed this land for something else. It was a long process, and we achieved voluntary relocation in both of those cases. And then obviously we provide emergency response and assistance. Emergency response for fire, medical emergencies, and crime is continuous and consistent response. And in talking to emergency responders, we did learn that, many people in both police and fire have developed relationships with people in the encampments, and they also respond and, they use multiple factors when they're determining how to respond to a situation. Of course, we began the outreach work program at the city to deal with conflicts on the commons, but it did expand over the years, and now there are outreach workers that do visit the encampments, and their goal is aimed really at meeting basic needs. So that's the background for how we've been doing it so far. Before we go into the policy and how we are categorizing land, or how the policy proposes to categorize land, I just wanted to show a map of the city-owned properties, both within the city and some without the city. The large purple area to the south of the city is our drinking water watershed. Most of it's in the town of Ithaca, and there's a small part of Nagondo Woods right under the southwest, that is also in the town of Ithaca. But you can see these are the city-owned properties that we're talking about, and we're gonna zoom into the southwest because that really is where we're really talking about managing. So I'll talk about the zones first, and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. So the proposed camping limits proposed by this policy are 3 zones. A green zone in which camping is temporarily allowed. So that means that the green zone is the southwest parcel of behind Lowe's and Walmart. And that would be areas of the southwest, although this picture doesn't depict it, the areas that aren't being actively managed. So this wouldn't include the dewatering site and any land being used by Public Works or the city or another city purpose. So if there are encampments or people camping due to homelessness in this area, it would be temporary. A red zone would be a no camping area where camping would be strictly prohibited. And as Cynthia did mention before, any area that is a red zone or would be proposed as a red zone would be, there wouldn't be encampments already in that area. We would be talking about removing people, would be talking about trying to prevent encampments from forming. And that, although the map doesn't show all the red zones, it does include city parks, tree lawns, sidewalks, parking lots, some areas where we don't currently have encampments, but wouldn't want them to develop. And then an amber zone where camping is prohibited, but there's a lower enforcement for priority enforcement. Lower enforcement for a priority. We don't have amber zones defined, but we'll talk about what their characteristics are. All right, so in the green zone, this is the framework for the policy. In the green zone, we would provide basic hygiene and sanitary service. There would be the prohibition on camping would not be enforced, and law enforcement would be instructed to take a non-involvement approach to camping unless there was an emergency response, an emergency situation. And but they would continue to provide emergency response for criminal activity. In the red zone, this would be the priority in the red zone again, would be to keep the area free of encampments. And campers located in the red zone would know, hopefully through our own outreach and outreach workers and our own outreach to people that, if you're camping in a red zone, you're going to be likely to have interactions with city staff requesting that you relocate. This is the protocol. And we can also take physical interventions that include physical barriers or potential reprogramming of the site. Amber zones, the policy suggests that the city look at enforcement in amber zones on a case-by-case basis. If a problem arises or a cumulative impact of multiple factors may warrant enforcement. However, so amber zones would be places where there were camping was already, we don't want to make them red, but as long as these encampments stay, as the policy says, civil, safe, and sanitary, it would not be prioritized for enforcement. And as with all zones, voluntary relocation would be the aim if we needed to do any enforcement. Of course, it's important to mention that the city has to reserve the right to remove or close campsites if there's an emergency situation or a hazard situation. We haven't had that, but it's important to mention, I think, say in this context. All right, what does the policy say about enforcement? So enforcement would be prioritized in this way, emergency condition or obstruction. So the policy talks about emergency conditions or obstruction would be some obstruction from the necessary public use of land. Very simple example of that could be like, again, a park or a sidewalk. Somebody would immediately be asked to leave if they set up a tent. And campsites in the red zones, again, would be always with the goal of voluntary relocation and to prevent encampments from forming in red zones, and then campsites in amber zones as needed. And again, it's outlined in the policy, the factors that would be taken into consideration for an amber zone. All right, and so the policy does two things. It creates a system, and then it has a protocol. So the system is a shared incident database and incident reporting system that anybody involved with communication in regard to enforcement or monitoring and could log into this database, and it could be widely shared with the whole city staff, with county, and it would give an opportunity to sort of keep track of what's going on so that it would help in the future as we make decisions. So that system does not exist now. We don't have a system of keep tracking what we're doing and how we're. And then the policy recommends an enforcement protocol that is as follows, and more fully explained in the policy. First, 3 visits by city staff, and this is in red zones. 3 visits by city staff. The general preference, of course, as the policy says, is for these visits to happen by outreach workers, but should they not want to do them or can't do them, it could be by city staff. 3 visits by city staff to inform people that camping is not allowed in the area in the red zone, to suggest to them areas where camping is allowed, and to hopefully connect people who are in the red zone to to agencies or groups that can provide them with options for housing or services that they might need. So this would be, we don't have a timeline set out, but it would be 3 visits, probably over maybe 3 weeks. People giving information, asking people to relocate, and telling them how they can connect the services. We would hope, the policy hopes that that would achieve voluntary relocation. If that is not achieved, then there are 3 more steps. The police would give a verbal notice to anyone camping in a red zone that they need to move. Then they would give written notice to anyone camping that they need to move. And then the culmination of the policy, if we couldn't get voluntary relocation at this point, would be a citation would be issued. A citation is basically an appearance ticket. It is not an arrest. And it would ask the person to appear in court to, because they had a citation. And I definitely want to say that the policy does not authorize or recommend police sweeps. That is not part of this policy. All right, so that is the policy overview that I was going to give. We have then some questions about what should be included and discussion points next. But before we move on, I wonder if people have, anybody in the group has anything to add, or anybody has any questions about what's in the policy or the presentation.
As a group member, before I start, I just want to first reiterate my great amount of thanks to Lisa, Nels, and all the city staff involved who played an important part alongside us in the group in drafting this policy. This is not an easy issue to tackle with, and we've been dealing with it for some time now. And so I really appreciate the hard work that went into it. And again, just want to reiterate that I think it's really important. Since the beginning, we've been discussing how criminalizing homelessness is not something that we are trying to do with the policy at all. That has guided us to this point. And so it's really important, as Lisa mentions at the end, that we're not criminalizing homelessness with this policy. And so that's really important. I imagine we'll get into discussion regarding some other things, and I think it's safe to say within the working group that enforcement has still remained probably the biggest challenge for us in terms of how to deal with this draft policy. And I think the voluntary encampment site is a wonderful idea that we should adopt immediately, and I'm hoping that we will create a better quality of life for individuals experiencing homelessness there. I still have my concerns regarding enforcement and how we deal with it, but it's a tricky, topic to broach. And so I'd love to hear from the rest of my colleagues here in PEDC outside of the working group about their thoughts on how we can deal with this. But there's a lot of great work that's come out of this and the larger efforts to deal with homelessness throughout the city of Ithaca. So I'm very grateful to have been a part of this and to see it move forward.
Well, I do have thoughts, but if there's more presentation, I'd rather just wait for you. So I'm curious.
Yes, yeah, I mean, it's some decision.
What do you want me to respond?
Well, it made me think of something, I'm not sure I emphasized enough in the presentation that, we looked at all these policies, but then we also started following news stories, and these communities are changing their policies all the time as they try to figure this out. And so one really important aspect of this is it's a pilot, so we can test these things over a period of time and see if they work, and if not, adjust. I just wanted to mention that.
Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that, because that was my question, was going to be about that. I noticed it's noted at the end of the policy, what's it called, evaluation. And so in my 8 years on council, we've had several opportunities to pilot things, and we're often not very good about identifying in advance what we will do at the end of a pilot time period to evaluate whether that pilot worked or didn't work, or what needs to change and move it forward. So and maybe this is in more of your presentation, but I would love to hear more about what we think we will be doing to collect information and therefore evaluate how we're doing. And I get it, it's a complex issue, and as we're seeing in other cities, they're morphing plans as they're going along. And so if there's anything we can learn from that, I think it would be a valuable lesson.
Did you want to answer?
Answer that, or
Sure. Or if anybody has anything to add, but again, a big part of the policy is establishing a way to collect information so that we know what's happening. And I think we definitely use that for evaluation. And we will hopefully have a person on staff who will have that role. And I think collecting data will be the important part, and to see if, are the interventions we're already taking in the red zone working? Are we, what are people, how many times does it take to approach somebody? If people move, are they not even going there? One of the important questions is, if we make it clear, if the policy makes clear where camping is temporarily allowed, where it's not, is that in and of itself enough information to prevent encampments where they are not desired by the policy?
I also appreciate everybody's efforts in this. It's been a long process, and I know George and I, we've been working on this for years. So the creation of the working group has been integral to taking it to an implementation step. And I really want to thank Jorge for his words and acknowledgement that the city policy does not in any way criminalize homelessness and does not endorse police sweeps or anybody ending up in a jail cell as a result of this policy. So I appreciate that clarification. I'm glad to see this move forward, but I'm also very mindful that we don't confuse this, right? This is a land use policy. This does not actually address quality of life or safety or welfare, right? It doesn't. And it kind of strikes me that, as we're talking about this, that we're creating this amber zone, which would be tolerated as long as it's sanitary and safe and so on. But presumably that is the same as well for the green zone. That, it is temporary as long as presumably it's safe and sanitary and so on, with the same standards with the amber zone. And both of those things, I think, for the success of those sites, it requires intimate partnership with county and outreach workers. And we cannot actually address quality of life issues for those living unhoused without that partnership. But I realize as a city, all we can do are the things that we have control over, we can't really set policy over the things we don't have control over. So this is the first step. It is constantly going to be revised and updated. But I do want to be mindful that this is just one step and, you know, to Jorge's comment earlier, right, we have so much more work to do to address the quality of life issues. And not only does it require partnership with the county and outreach workers, but to, you know, the speaker's comment earlier, it will also require participation of neighboring property owners. So, you know, the railroad site, for which a lot of these other activities are happening, which are unsafe, whether we're talking about the fires, the violence, the crime, you know, those are occurring on private property. We cannot include them in the red zone because we don't have control over that land. It's private land. But we do need to work closely with private property owners so that we can address those land use issues and safety issues and other issues. And only together will we be able to look at this holistically, because just focusing on city land itself, you know, experience has shown that the activities will go to other spaces that aren't getting the same level of attention. So making sure that we cooperate with WATCO and other private property owners is going to be important as well.
Thank you all for all the work that you've done. And I'm glad it's a pilot. It's not, it's just a way of seeing how does this work. I'm still, leery about the language that's used, you know, because when we talk enforcement, I don't know about other people that I automatically go to what enforcement has meant over years and years in many communities. I'm very clear that this is not areas that people of color usually use. And so my concern is, not my concern is how does this, that's why it's a pilot, right? So we can learn from it. And that's the part I'm looking forward. And I really am looking forward to like using different language when we talk about this, you know, like how the policy overview could be. Anyway, the language. And so I've talked with a young lady who did a lot of history about, I mean, going way back, history about these land used and people using the land. It was very interesting, very interesting. So thank you all for your hard work.
Yeah, I too am very thankful for all the work that the staff and members of council and public have done in this. It's a extremely difficult problem that many municipalities are dealing with no obvious solutions, nor the resources to combat it. Really disheartening to read articles like how housing first, which used to be this bipartisan thing for decades, is now something like the GOP is resisting. And so depending on who controls the federal government, you could see even that limited bit of resources dry up. But I appreciate that we as a community, as a council, that approaches like on the other pumpkins, and that the number of the policies has been really thoughtful. And so there's a few comments. So I agree with Phoebe that, you know, my preference, so I should also say that it's tough, you know, we have working groups and committees because we don't have the capacity to do, I don't have the bandwidth to tackle everything. So obviously I haven't been in the room for the months and years that you all have been, so you know, take my
Months.
yeah. So you know,
Months for the work, yes, yeah, months for the work.
but in general, like just years of conversation, but I fully appreciate that. I know it's super difficult. And so I'm coming in having having been my focus, so take this a little bit. So, yeah, I too would prefer something other than enforcement because those have connotations that I think would be better served, avoiding just, again, as a messaging thing, to really live up to what we repeatedly stated, that we're not interested in criminalizing homelessness. And the other thing is, I'm still not sure about this colored zoning thing, because, so camping is already prohibited throughout the city. I think my preference would be to highlight, focus on the green zone and the resources that will offer, which I assume are still on the table in terms of like, you know, running water and maybe some temporary structures. I focus too on outreach worker contacts over the three last bullet points. So I'm thinking back to, I don't know, Cynthia, you were there, at least it was there too, when Assemblymember Kellis brought the various to these chambers and members of county legislature and county council and staff from both bodies, some public people too, got together and they kind of talked about these very issues. And, you know, George asked this very good question about, you know, some people will just not want to move, or sorry, not want to find housing or get help with their drug use issues. And they acknowledge, yeah, it's really difficult. Sometimes it takes a few asks and that person is kind of immediately ready to have the desire to change their lives. And some other people will take dozens of asks, and it's frustrating, difficult work. But in their experience, that's what it takes to convince someone to, you know, apply for housing, or just be, forget the applying, just being willing to accept the help of someone else walking them through this really tough bureaucratic process. So all that to say that, you know, the enforcement protocol, again, don't love enforcement, but the protocol by which we encourage people, if they end up in a place that we prefer that they not camp, use outreach workers exclusively to make those contacts and that plea and those offers of assistance and resources. So yeah, so those are the things I'd like to highlight and for us to focus on what I'm personally interested in. To Lisa's point, it was a just policy. And then several of you have said, like, we really need to coordinate with the county, who does have, you know, they're the funnel to which state and federal social program money goes through, and we can focus on the things that we care about. I'm hoping that we can hire this homeless coordinator person and define what they're going to do and how they're going to interact with the county and other agencies. Again, I appreciate the work. Those are the things I'd like to focus on, and I'm glad to see progress in this. Thank you.
Okay, I know I love some stuff out, but I did want to come back to this point about language and whole thing of, like, you know, everything that I'm watching of it's about police verbal notice, police written notice, police citation issued, and enforcement. And why, and I don't know, I thought of it when you were talking, why do those things have to be done by police officers, right? If you keep talking about someone who's gonna be paid to do this work, right? And, you know, outreach workers and different things. So if we really are talking about, you know, this pilot program and it not being enforced and it not being criminalized, why are we using police officers when they come into communities, and not just Black and brown communities, the anxiety and stuff that happens to people when they see police is not saying they come in and being this friendly guy. I'm not saying nothing other than my perception or my view or others of what we need when we send in police. And when I've ever been given a citation to go to in front of a judge, it's a little more. So what I'm saying is, these are conversations we're not having, and these are why bells are going off when we hear and we talk about criminalization, right? How, you know, and I'm not gonna give kudos for this, but when, you know, you keep saying you're not criminalizing, but you keep involving who other than comes on play when somebody's being criminalized, right? So, I mean, y'all did a lot, and I'm thankful for all the work that y'all did, but I mean, you did not, let me stop now. No, I'm not gonna stop, but let me just talk a little more about what does it mean about, you know, what does it mean to people when they're saying this sounds more like they're gonna be criminalized, right? We're not saying that we're sending the, anyway, when we talk about, anyway, that's just a point of what I've been thinking, and not saying that, you know, y'all didn't do a good job, you did.
Sorry to begin, but if you reminded me of another thing that I was thinking was putting aside, you know, the optics, which are important, but just as a pragmatic matter, I'm kind of curious and skeptical whether issuing citations would even be effective. It's actually heartened by something Lisa said about how when the dewatering facility was built, and you know, we need that, and we probably need DEC to actually start the dredging.
Yeah.
But anyway, I was heartened by the fact that when we needed that built, and New York State DEC came in to build it, that, you know, we were able to get them to voluntarily relocate. And I think that speaks to how effective it can be to have an outreach worker or a city staff, you know, a non-uniform city staff person come out there and say like, hey, you know, we want this to be a public resource. We do have this other area with far more amenities. So I think that story gave me hope that, in fact, focusing on outreach worker contacts would be as effective, if not more effective, than police stations.
I appreciate this conversation, and, you know, I can look through our work with members, and these are the exact conversations that we've had repeatedly, and almost every single meeting, we come back to the same question. And I think that the feeling is very much, we all are in agreement. But at the same time, recognizing that you do need to have the stick, although you never hope to use it. That it does give a clear indication to individuals that this is something that could be utilized, but by all accounts, we want to do everything possible to avoid it because of the negative interaction, because it's not who we are as a community. That's not how we see ourselves interacting with our residents in that way. But I think by having it there, it does recognize that that is a possibility for that. But just based on if past behavior is an indicator of future events, I mean, for the last decade, we have not actively used law enforcement in this way. And we've done everything possible to avoid it. So I do think that our track record in that sense, unless in the most egregious of cases, you know, and again, here's an individual, right? The question is, if other housing options are available, right? Only if there are no other housing options available is this a violation, right? Because that is Martin versus Boise, right? If there are no other housing options available, then sleeping rough is not a violation, right? So here's somebody where other housing options are available. They are consistently and repeatedly choosing not to access it and then continuing to go against the city policy. And again, doing everything possible to avoid a police citation, but recognizing that there is a deliberate choice to not take advantage of resources available, to rather continue to live rough in inappropriate areas. I think it's just, and I will say, you know, I think I can speak for the committee that the council members of the working group were consistently very cautious about the word enforcement. And then the administrators and staff are like, well, people need to clearly know and understand what the role of staff is. And I appreciate that direction and clarity that understandable language provides, as much as I feel very uncomfortable with it. One of the things that I hear mentioned over and over again, and it goes back to we can only set policies over things that we control, is if we, as our policy, rely on outreach workers, then we, the city, need to employ outreach workers. Which we don't. We employ outreach workers indirectly, which may or may not actually be engaging or effective or following our policy. So I think if we are going to have a policy that these interactions should be through outreach workers, they probably should in some way be city staff people with that job, because then at least we know that interaction is going to happen, that it's happening with the authority of the city and the direction of the city under the policy. But of course that comes with other responsibilities as well. But to go to an employee of a different organization and say our entire policy hinges on you interacting with this person and shepherding them to a more appropriate place. I don't know if it's fair on that other organization. That there's that disconnect.
Yeah, no, I appreciate a lot of what's been said, and I think Duxon and Phoebe's points have highlighted what I mentioned in my previous comment about where my concerns and hesitations are with some of the elements of the policy, which overall, like a lot of the aspects that we're doing here in terms of interactions with the unhoused population and creating a viable alternative location for them to be in, I think are perfectly good. But returning to the issue of enforcement, administration, what have you, I think Dustin's point is very well had, that I don't believe the citation will be super effective in the Cynthia's word is stick, so to speak, from moving folks. And I think our track record has shown that voluntary, cooperation and persuasion has been more effective. And so as a last resort, last measure, I personally don't feel that it's a very strong one, and I don't feel comfortable with it, of us having it for the sake of having it. And I think that has to wrestle with the difficult reality that in terms of trying to get folks to relocate who might be resistant to it, we are in a difficult position if we want to hold true to our values that we don't want to criminalize homelessness. And it's difficult and a challenging reality to be in, but I don't think that a lesser or a less effective approach of enforcement as a last resort for the sake of having one is the best approach for it. And I don't want that to hinder what overall I think is a good approach for trying to get folks to a better location and a more safer area long term. And I think something your point is well taken about, like, if we're going to have folks do outreach with these folks, we should be coordinate. They should be aware that we're the ones tasking them to do that. And I'm not 100% sure if that means directly staffing them or just, again, we have to have deeper relationships. I think as has been mentioned by everyone here with the county. If they're going to be providing these outreach workers, we're going to be doing a lot of this direct engagement, but that's just where I'm coming from. And I really do agree with a lot of the sentiments that have been mentioned here. It's a difficult situation, and I think we're trying to, our best ability to move forward with it.
Thank you. So I'm going to pause us for a second. I just want to check in with Lisa, because I think there were some things that you wanted to make sure you heard from us tonight. And so I'll look to you or maybe any other members of the working group to make sure that we get to cover those things.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, I really appreciate this conversation. I really appreciate this conversation, and I just want to make sure that I see that, I want to make sure that everybody understands or in the policy, it's a 6-step process, and I think I made an error in presenting this, because I bunched the 3 site visits by city staff into one bullet point, and so it's true, you see the police, but there are 3 city visits by city staff. The vast preference is for those to be conducted by outreach workers, but they may not be willing or able to do so. So that's the policy, and I want to make sure everybody understands too, as we have said, red zones don't currently have encampments on the policy is to try to prevent that from happening. So when somebody's asked to relocate from a red zone, we're talking about one campsite possibly, if it happens. So like, it's not, so just so that, I just want that to be clear.
Yeah.
All right, so, again, thank you very much for the discussion. And so we have some points that we are interested in, some policy points that we wanted more input on. So one of them is, should additional lands be added to the red or amber zones? And these are the discussions we had. So currently, the only red zone we have identified is this one, but as you know, and as we've discussed, the parks and parking lots and tree lawns are also red. So there were 4 other properties. This property at the end of Floral, this property at the end of Cherry. It's actually several parcels, city-owned parcels. And these 2 parcels, other parcels were discussed, didn't make it onto the map, but we could continue to talk. So the discussions that we had were, should this Floral Ave parcel and this parcel on Cherry Street be added to the red zone? The reason being for the Cherry Street parcel is that it previously was a part of that parcel that we wanted to sell or develop for another use. And we, at the time, we moved people from that, we asked people who collaboratively move people from that parcel. And there have been conflicts with the businesses in this area. So that might be a parcel to add into the red zone, knowing that we're going to reprogram it. And then the Floral Ave parcel. Negundo Woods is 2 parcels, one of which is in the town and one of which is in the city. This parcel has very active encampments on it, but it doesn't, have, what we heard from emergency responders is it's really hard to find people there because it doesn't have the kind of roads that we put in other places, and like, it's very difficult to find people because it's just a bunch of trails. So we discussed turning this into an amber zone, recognizing that people are already camping here, but it really isn't a green zone because we can't provide anything else. But we don't want it to be, obviously, it wouldn't fit the definition of red zone because people are camping. And then what do we do with the parcel in the town? I'm not sure actually what the state of how many people are in this parcel, but what should we do with the parcel in the town, recognizing that it is our land, but it is in our jurisdiction. So that was the discussion. And then on the left, this is the Black Diamond Trail as it goes through the city. And something that may want to be, we discussed, may want to be considered either now or in the future is, as the trail gets developed, do we want to have a buffer along each side of the trail that would be categorized as red? That's a future decision, but that is one decision point. We can talk about that now, what people think. Was it clear what I presented? Or?
Just a quick question. Do you have other discussion points that you need from us?
They're much simpler.
Okay, so
yeah.
maybe we can pause here to discuss this one. Okay. I saw Cynthia's hand. You want to go ahead, Cynthia?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time looking at maps, so it's interesting to do this. I would very much support including the property on Floral Avenue as a red zone. I will highlight that property is between 2 income and family oriented housing complexes, West Village Apartments and Cedar Creek Apartments. West Village has made concerted efforts to address, safety and activities in their complex. I spoke to residents a couple of weeks ago and last week as well to ask how things were going there, and they tell me that things are much improved in terms of activities that were going on Chestnut Street. And everyone I spoke to was quite alarmed at the idea that this might be a site that, as an amber zone, might welcome encampments there, just with the associated activities that tend to happen. So I would deter allowing this as an amber zone, given its immediate proximity to families and children in this residential area. In terms of Nagunda Woods, I guess I have some questions. I understand Nagunda Woods to be a natural area and maybe even be a county designated unique natural area. I also am concerned that if there is sort of a nod to an amber zone there, when there is no easy access for emergency or fire service, I don't even think that you can get to half of the town portion through the city. I think you have to go all the way through the other side, and I'm not even sure if there's a road, an easy road to get out there. So by indicating it as an amber zone, I think it invites activities without the city's ability to provide emergency services should they be so required. They're both quite swampy areas as well. And if there were a flooding event and you would need, it's that emergency scenario that you might need to move people out for their own safety. I don't even know if we could get out there to try to relocate people to safe spaces in case that there was a flooding incident.
Any other thoughts, Dr.?
I think I'll just say quickly, so putting aside well, I won't put aside, I continue having ambivalence about the color coding system, but decided to take that route. I will say this is one area of needs that I would just defer to the working group, because I'll be honest, I just don't know the area as well as the world next to. But yeah, I would reiterate, so kind of I focus on green zones and make the assumption that otherwise the preference of the city is to get campers off of that area and makes it these code zones.
No, my question is, and forgive me for sorry, I'm not real familiar with all these different areas. I'm not a map person. I have to see stuff in person, that kind of stuff. And I'm sure I've seen these places. My question is this, because we have a shortage of housing and different things like that, and this is city-owned land, why aren't we, is it because it can't, or we not, why aren't there no talk about, making these areas places where people can live and thrive, and that's what I'm saying, is but I heard something about the land this area over on Floral being swampy, so I can understand maybe that's why, but wasn't this a big old swamp before, right? And look at all the work that has happened, and so, at any time, right, that we're in swampy land, we can get, so I'm just real trying to figure out why never has, knowing our housing shortage, knowing this is city's property, why has it never been used in ways in which people can live? You know, maybe,
Okay, so I can speak, floral, I don't think is swampy, although I haven't visited, but the green zone there, southwest, that's a part, it's often called Southwest Park, Southwest. Actually, the first project I had when I came here almost 20 years ago was to run a project to evaluate whether that could be developed as a neighborhood.
yeah.
So it's been used for public works purposes for many, many, many years and still is being used as, you know, now it has a dewatering site on it, but we also use it to store materials and to dispose of materials that we don't know what to do with. But it's a very complex site. It has because of the way that it's been used, the geotechnical situation, the underground, it doesn't lend itself to buildings.
Yeah.
And it has 11 acres of wetlands and a big utility easement. It was evaluated and unfortunately, and we have had people interested, but it's very difficult to build on. So that I can answer to that one. There was a lot of interest in turning that into some kind of neighborhood, but it just wasn't deemed feasible.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Benson. So related to that, but yeah, so, you know, TCAT also evaluated that
Yeah.
site and found it just impossible for our needs. But, hasn't one of the Home Together Tompkins partners proposed something on that lot or an adjacent one? And have they done feasibility study, do you know? I think it's a good question. You know where they're even proposing, and you have to actually evaluate whether their proposal is feasible on the conditions of the soil.
You know, we have been talking to people. I think it's been looked at and I'm not sure what the feasibility conclusion is. But it is a very, which, and of course, the end of Cherry Street could be developed as for public works.
Yeah, the site has a lot of, I have hesitation for the site for housing for a couple of reasons. From an environmental justice standpoint, I just want to highlight that immediately adjacent to the southern end of that site is the Tompkins County Solid Waste Facility. It's the dump. Right, so, you know, I'm very hesitant to put housing immediately next to the dump, which comes with smells and activities and, you know, all of those things. And again, as an environmental justice actor, with my like infrastructure hat on, I also recognize that as our city grows and changes, we will have need for land for city purposes that we can't anticipate now. You know, it was maybe, you know, when we dredged the inlet and created it in the 70s, it seemed logical to turn all of the swampland that got turned into parkland and turned it all into park and give it away. But then when it came time for dredging, we found that we had no land to put the dredge spoil site on. And thankfully we had this land to do that with. And then we will need to dredge, you know, pretty much continuously, I think forevermore, because of the way the, you know, plane or whatever levels and have it be silted up and need to dredge. So having space for future municipal use, whatever that use may be, and not encumbering that space gives the city resiliency over the next 100 years that I'm also reluctant to give up, because I think as we continue to build, we have less space to do these types of things, such as the dredge spoil site. But yeah, that said, it is a fairly large piece of property, and you know, what could we do to address our needs in the short term as well?
Thank you, Cynthia. Jorge?
Thank you. I think, just furthering on echoing a lot of points I've heard recently, like looking at these maps, and we've spent a lot of time and working with different maps and trying to figure out the best way from an optics and presentation stance to like practically speaking, what's feasible with our limited resources and capacity. And again, like I think to a point Cynthia and Dr. both brought up about sort of the different colored zones and whatnot, it's a challenge because there's a lot, because it increases the difficulty of us as a city to articulate what is considered what is allowed for folks to be in, what is kind of not really allowed, what is not. And the fact that a lot of that could change rather quickly, I think proves that like it's tough to make that aspect work in a way that is ideal and beneficial for a lot of folks. And so I am sympathetic to Duxton's point regarding the confusion around having a 3-tiered like colored zone and whatnot, especially because situations regarding the amber zone can be very, very murky. And I think focusing on, again, voluntary incentivization and focus on the sites where we do have a lot of camping, I think is going to be really important going forward with this articulating our policy and trying to encourage folks to leave areas that we either that we have varying levels of comfort with them being on a personal or community safety sort of stance.
Any other thoughts or comments about this particular discussion point? We didn't talk a lot about Cherry Street, but I think your point about the possible uses look like, at least on the, what would that be, the northern end of it, those look like parcels that are kind of identified as potential sites for.
Yeah, it was actually, I think, it was these parcels almost all the way back that were identified as parcels to be marketed for sale. And there was an actual project proposed many years ago, but then the site feasibility didn't work for the particular project because of the soils. But that is our last place for certain types of businesses in the city on Cherry Street.
So,
Goodness.
well, to that point, like, if it wasn't suitable, so Emmys was still, right? So if it wasn't suitable for Emmys, which is a pretty light industrial, kind of special housing, do you envision uses that aren't that, but it would still be productive?
Yeah, Emmys, it was a combination of they actually had very heavy equipment they had to put in their facility, even though they make these light, beautiful pieces. And also the cost of doing all the site preparation was just too much to me. So I think another use could handle that, but it wasn't feasible. I mean, they found it.
Yeah.
Well, and I'll just mention it since you do have so many new members of council that, that area of Cherry Street is actually not zoned for residential use. And the reason being is that space between the green zone and the end of Cherry Street is actually the Ithaca rail yard storage site. So if you have any reason to go back there, I think there's about, I'm gonna estimate about 270 rail cars there. And so they moved all the cars up from Pennsylvania, they stored them on the site, there are 3 engines there. So in terms of noise and rail activity, I have residents at Nate's who have my number on speed dial, and don't hesitate to give me a call when things go on at the rail yard. And so strongly would avoid having permanent housing at the end of Cherry Street because of that.
Are we, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't go. Are we,
So
So my question is, that's city owned, right?
Which one is?
Which-
Yes,
Yeah.
We-
yeah,
yeah.
that is,
And we have railroad cars.
right here.
Yeah, but the railroad cars are not on city.
Oh, they're not on the
Yeah,
city
they're right
property.
here, we're on.
That's their
Yeah.
property.
Yes,
they're
this is the, could have put their, yes, right there.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking, well, you said it can't be used, could that be sort of a place that people who are experiencing homelessness and stuff like that? Cause I'm thinking transition in my head, right? Not something that they have to be there forever, but could that be something used as sort of a transitioning place for them? Say, now you got amber, you got red, you got green, let's make a yellow zone. Like here's a place that we can fix up, here's area owned by the city that can be used to, cause you got that place where you be washing and taking a shower, blah, blah, blah. And then you use this area where people may not have nowhere to sleep, that you say, I worked for the hostel project, years ago. And there was a place where people could stay up to 10 days. Anyway, okay, I should have been in that committee, but anyway, I wasn't. But just thinking out, like, how do we use some of the city property that we haven't been using in a way that people could be, moving in a direction? Okay, I see Lisa looking at a while.
No,
No, I'm just saying. No, just thinking out loud, that's all.
Thanks, Jorge, go ahead.
Just, last thing that, Missy, that point really reminds me of, things I'm thinking about as well, is like, we do have a lot of challenges on like, what do we want as a viable spot for housing, for places where we want folks to be, given that we have limited development or building space and, areas that might be considered desirable. And I think we have to start thinking on like, the same levels of environmental justice, on public safety, on what, all these things we have to be thinking about our limited housing stock as the primary contributor to the issue of homelessness that we're dealing with here. And I think we have to hold that in strong consideration along with other issues that might give us pause on attracting different projects to address our limited housing stock issues. And it's, I grew up in New York City, and many folks will tell you there that, nobody likes living, in front of a lot of hot garbage during the summer, or,
Right.
or Staten Island being a dump before it was, officially turned into a borough of New York City. These are difficult things we have to address with, but and we want the best quality of life for all of our neighbors and residents here. But the issue of housing availability and housing stock, I think, needs to be on that same level of concern when we're talking about the long-term solutions to these issues. And I'm not saying that there's a silver bullet that let's just build everywhere, and all that type of thinking, but it's something that we have to consider alongside those as like a primary concern when trying to deal with the issue of homes. Sure.
Yeah, all good points. I agree. I think Cynthia makes a good point that, we, in looking at rezoning the entire waterfront, very purposely left that space as a space that would not allow residential development. And I think it's also something we'd love to see be repurposed in some kind of light industrial way, because it's one of the last parcels in the city that would be exclusively for that kind of use. And to Jorge's good points, that's not the best place for even temporary housing as a result, I think. But I love the creativity, and I think that's the kind of thinking we need to continue to look at other spaces. So yeah, this is the dilemma, right? So I think if we go ahead, and then maybe we'll move on to the next points. Yeah.
Speaking of creative thinking, so when we look at the Meadow Street corridor, can we You know, I know that obviously I've always said that this is the commercial center of the city. This is where all of our tax revenue comes from. Really, is this segment right here. But if and when there is ever a new development in terms of a new store, can we require there also to be housing? I mean, you have space, the airspace in the top. I've seen it done in other urban areas where the malls actually have housing incorporated into it. You know, it would provide access to services, to transportation, to food, dining, everything else. But, you know, as we talk about multi-use, how can we sort of shoehorn into any redevelopment concept in the Meadow Street section to say we need to put housing here?
That is our dream.
Right.
Talk about that all the time, you know. That's such a great idea, and we certainly do talk to people about it, but it hasn't been like that. Sorry, it's okay.
Yeah.
So, you know, one thing I think about Meadow Street is that we zoned it, the market took over, and we got exactly what we zoned for. Exactly. So we haven't done, maybe we could get something else if we put that same amount of effort and focus onto, you know, transforming that into commercial and house, more of a mixed use. But it was very successful. We got exactly what we planned there. And now, 20 years later, it's like, well, oh wow, we should have asked for something else. So, you know, we do talk to people, to developers about it, but it really needs some momentum and planning. That is it's a great suggestion. There's a lot of capacity there. Redevelopment.
Yeah, that was 20 years ago, and now people don't do that much retail. And they would make more money in income from rental compared to retail. I'm surprised at times when I go in stores, I can't believe the number of people in there. What used to be, you know, people love shopping, and now they like sitting on their phone and shop. I know.
Yeah, it's a good point, and also, Cynthia, I do think it's a smart idea, and Lisa, maybe we can talk about, to your point, we got what we wanted with zoning, so maybe we should be rethinking what that zoning, how that zoning might be defined today to incent a different concept. And I know there's been some conversations like mostly outside of the city, but you know, where the mall is up in Lansing was thought to be developed into that kind of mixed use, and the Cornell owned parcel on East Hill in the town of Ithaca has had a few ideas pitched for how that could become a mixed use commercial and residential. So yeah, I think there's maybe some other municipalities we can look to help us guide us in that. Okay, so let's move on to the other discussion points, because, you know,
So there's two more discussion points, and I feel like we discussed the one on the left, and I'm not sure we came to a conclusion or, and then, the other one is just, should this be circulated? Should we make changes before we circulate this, or should this be circulated as is, and changes that get made are based on the comments that we get in this discussion? So those really be the two.
so if I could just weigh in on the thing on the point on the left. So I heard a lot tonight about the enforcement protocol, and it seemed to me that we broke it into two areas. One was who does that enforcement, and the other was what's the process, I guess, or the timeline or the steps in a protocol. So I'd love to, you know, if we do move this forward, I'd love to parse those things a little better so that we can see that there is a way to finish out the parts of the protocol Whether it's defined by the 6 steps that it currently has, I don't think it would be exactly as we get more input. But there needs to be a sort of a place to progress it, as you might say. And then the other is, do we need to do more about defining who does that? And I thought I heard some really important points tonight about things like those people, if they're enforcing city policy, that should they be working for the city or not? I think that's a really important point. And then whether or not someone who, when we say police, and we have that vision of what police look like right now, are they the right people to be involved in those last stages or progressions of the protocol? So I hope we can figure out ways to get input on those. And I know that the group has probably had this discussion around and around many times. So if you have some thoughts about that, I'm happy to hear them. Or let's go with Cynthia, Duxon, and Jorge.
It just actually reminds me that, you know, under reimagining public safety, we have a team of peer. And we don't call them caseworkers, right, but a co-response team to go along with law enforcement as necessary, starting in the beginning and you know, through a pilot program to determine when law enforcement would be necessary and when they could act on their own. But their core responsibility, and Phoebe, you recall this, right, was to make sure that people were connected with services. Right, and to be sort of that warm handoff that would follow up and make sure that individuals were getting assistance that they needed in order to reduce their interaction with law enforcement. And so perhaps that's already includes those positions that we envision, although it still comes under that public safety component, maybe not maybe it's not law enforcement per se, but it's a public safety response.
Yeah, I was gonna make exactly that point. We've already decided as a council that we're gonna fund very modestly at first, and hopefully we'll grow. And I think the exact, because I think the point, I had this thought too as I was reading through the policy that like, can't ask Family and Children's Services to do our buddies or our encouragement for us. I mean, we can, and they've already been trying, but you know, it's best if it's our own employees executing the policy that we set forward. And we actually have those people. And that's who I would empower, not empower, but like task with making those contacts. And I know it's not, we have 5 cooks in the kitchen, but if we're straw polling, my answer to the question on the left is to at least initially not involve police. Have a goal of tasking this unarmed response unit with the, you know, like this is that one bullet point is actually multiple potential staff people from building department and these future co-response people that we funded. So that's what I prefer to do, the enforcement encouragement, we will call it.
Not to be faster on the draw, you guys take it. Yes, make my points exactly. I thought I was, as I've been having conversations with different folks, I think this is an ideal role for alarm responders and whatnot. I know we have a ways to go before we can get them operating on their own. And I do agree with Doug that I think that, you know, ideally I'd want for them to be the ones handling that, but until we can get to that point. Again, I think it should, if we can avoid it, and I think we should avoid involvement with law enforcement, to be handling enforcement administration, whatever we call this, and really highlight and focus on the benefits and positives of moving to a sanctioned encampment site, and getting connected with services and what have you. And I think that's the best way to go. Again, also thinking about harboring and cultivating that sense of trust amongst the unhoused population and whatnot. I think this is going to go a lot way. And I remember the earlier point that Ms. Phoebe brought up during this conversation regarding thinking about how tensions can rise, and you know, anxieties can increase just with the presence of law enforcement. This doesn't speak to, you know, any slights against individuals or how they might respond. It's just the nature of the institutions that we have within our country. And so I think that I agree with Duxon that I think handling, you know, focusing on finding out what we want to land on in terms of enforcement, administration, what have you, and also that we, we don't involve law enforcement, as a part of that. And we work amongst ourselves in the city and with the county to figure out how to task, encouragement to relocation, today.
I totally agree with everybody, and I think, public safety, and this was actually pretty much made for a match made, that people will be seeing people from the community that they pretty much know or know of the work that they're doing and feel more safe than feeling like, not saying it's just until, because we're still building community and relations with our police officers, and start out, they go together, however it works out, but this, I think everybody's pretty much on the same page. And and I think that's the only changes need to be circulated. But,
So I will say in terms of changes before circulation, I'm also not crazy about the yellow zone. So I don't know if that's something that we want to consider. Whether or not we should have a yellow zone, or what is our approach to that? I know that Dustin is mentioning that he's ambivalent with regards to these color-coded zones. I'm not a fan of it myself, so I'm not sure if there are other people who have thoughts on that.
I mean, yeah, I agree, and I think that this has also been alongside enforcement, the working through how we're going to define and interact, engage with different colored zones is a big issue, and I'm very sympathetic too. And this is the good aspect about bringing this policy in terms of discussion to committees and hearing how other counselors are engaging with it. I do think that just focusing on the green zone, in terms of language for the policy, I think makes a lot of sense just in terms of simplicity and whatnot. Yeah, I think that's a point well taken.
Any other thoughts on these? Lisa, you need more from us? Do you feel like you got enough there?
Well, I still don't know. You want this change before circulation of just taking out the last, I would just call it for simplification, taking out the last 3 steps. Or of enforcement, which is, if you look at the policy, the police verbal notice, the police written notice, the police citation. We don't have unarmed responders yet, right? So, I mean, there are many options. You could take those out. You could put them in when, to go into effect when those people are hired. If that is part of their duties, I don't even know. But do you want to keep that in for right now for circulation to see what people say, or do you want to take those last 3?
So just to be clear, the last 3 would be the way it's written in the draft policy is as police giving a verbal notice, a written notice, and then a citation.
It's a 6-step process. The first 3 are city staff or outreach workers. We can't assign outreach workers in our policy, but I certainly would want them to do that if they were willing to.
And
then the last 3.
And that really combines those 2 ideas of the person that does that is a police officer. And the progression is those 3 things, a verbal, written, and then a citation.
Yes, I guess I'm still not clear if you want to take those out. If you want to change that, or you want it to be circulated and people to comment.
Well, I would say there are 5 of us, so we're gonna have to struggle or find some way to come at consensus, but for my part, I would say yes, circulate without including the police bullets. I think we saw, last month's meeting that there's a lot of interest, and I think for messaging and, well, and policy, it's not just about that thing, it's, from my perspective, I think it's good policy, but it's also just, I can already tell you, just that I think it'll get unnecessary and undue attention, and my preference would be to remove it before situation.
Tiffany, go ahead.
I just want to again echo what Dexter was saying. First off, I think everyone who's been working on this policy has been doing such a great job. Cynthia, your work on this over the years to fight for our house's population has been really inspiring. But I do think that we've been marketing this, like all of us, as something that is a short-term solution that can quickly tackle these problems. And I think the best way to get this passed as quickly as possible is to take out the 3 final steps. At the very least, because I don't think they're strong enough as they stand right now in terms of enforcement, and because I think that it would not be good messaging, as we have been saying over and over again, we do not want to criminalize houses. Thank you.
So again, I want to make sure we're not throwing away a piece of the idea that the group in particular thought was important, which was a progression of activity that would help in the end goal of getting someone to voluntarily move. So I don't know if by removing 3 steps and just leaving the first 3 that are just 3 visits, does that progress enough in the intent that the policy had? So is it just removing the police from this activity, or are there activities like a written notice, for example, that wouldn't be involved in the first 3 activities that might make sense?
I did want to say too, that I think the policy says that in some cases, the police may make some of these first visits just because they're the staff that is the most, for whatever reason, the people that are available or willing or able to do it. So it doesn't necessarily say that, doesn't define who the city staff would be necessarily. So I don't think that's the ideal, but that is also in the policy somewhere.
Tiffany, go ahead, and then Dustin.
I think I'll echo Dustin's anecdote from earlier. We have to remember that it often takes more than 3 tries if somebody is intent on staying in the encampment zone. And that oftentimes it takes persistence. And that is, through good social work and things that I think we can work on as we move forward and implement this policy. But I do think that at the very least, cutting it off at 3 doesn't reflect the experiences of houseless people as well as the opinions of experts.
Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, Rob, you're making a good point, like, we should also, to remove those steps, I would also suggest we just said, kind of say something about making repeated attempts. And, so I wish we had come up with a name for them, but whoever our unarmed co-response people are, yeah, they don't exist yet, not how yet, their job descriptions are vague, but I think we can, this seems very much in the spirit of what we've talked about for years in terms of what they would do. So even if not hired yet, we don't have like a detailed job description, it's not out of line. And so for my part, I think it'd be okay to mention them as one of the potential, people who are making these contacts. And so 3rd point, Lisa, that you just reminded me about, and I would agree on it, but
Because my question was, we have Deb and Mike and Laura in the back, I'm not sure if you.
I would happily invite them up if they have
come up to
something
the
to share.
table or.
Yes.
You hear us chattering back here? Mike and I are like.
I'm hearing a big voice.
Can you
Back of the room.
We're just chattering. We actually,
Yeah, we pull up the policy.
we generally, the discussion you're having right now is the discussion that the working group has had approximately 17 times. So we're all living it again together. If you pull the policy
All
out,
right, that,
I think
given our internet situation here, that may take you a minute, but I'm sure I can do it.
we may have done a disservice by the way that we tried to simplify it by putting it in the slide.
Yes.
And I think that the point that Rob just made is the community outreach workers and the support service people and the other, like DSS and some of these other people that we went through like verbal gymnastics to not use the word enforcement in this policy. And then when we shared it around, everybody was like, well, if you don't put the word enforcement in, then why are you even bothering writing policy? Like, that's what the groups have been asking for us, asking from the city was very clear clarification on what you can do where. And they themselves said that you have to use some sort of enforcement. Like back here, like Googling synonyms for enforcement. We've had other words
that
and other
we
ways
used,
that
and people were like, what does that mean?
but it wasn't clear, it was confusing, and quite honestly, some of the community outreach workers were the ones that suggested that we need to somehow have a relationship with police, because there are instances when they are not comfortable doing this. So like, how do we create an environment where we're also supporting the people who are asking to do this work? So basically, if we made a lot of the changes that were suggested here this evening, essentially what would end up happening is kind of what's happening now, is sort of piecemeal. Whoever was free from DPW at the time would go and talk to the person. Like that's kind of what would happen. So if you, oh, here, that, okay. So this is much more detail what the intent was around this concept of enforcement with escalating levels. Maybe all we need is to take a look at D and E and see if someone else could deliver those things instead of police. Like, is a verbal, some sort of formal verbal notice, not police, but someone else of some sort of authority. And then the written notice, it was actually the officers who work very closely with this population, some of whom actually on their own time voluntarily walk through this area and give out water and ask how people are doing. They have like relationships with people who are living in the area. They themselves said, what can we do that would also help give information and guidance and connect to support services? So their suggestion of a written notice was, could it be a document that has information and phone numbers and who to contact? So like when they're giving a written notice, they're also handing out something that has information on who to talk to or how to get connected or how to get assistance by it or something like that. So maybe we just need to look at D and E and take police, just not have it be police, but have it be something. I also think that a lot of what everyone is asking for tonight, we do not have all of the pieces in place yet. So I think there's absolutely a place for whatever the unarmed response ends up looking like to be used here, but they don't exist yet. So we've also heard urgency from people, like if this, why is it taking so long? Why hasn't it happened? So we can't put something in place that we don't have any hope of being able to do. And that's part of the problem that we're dealing with. So maybe if we have it look escalating, but we use every other method and every other person and every other human and compassionate way that we can in order to help somebody relocate, as you heard the story of basically DPW doing that when we had to move people off of the dewatering site. That was the goal with this. And so that did not shine through in the presentation. And I just wanted to make sure that we were looking at the complete list of what we meant by quote unquote escalation and enforcement. And I completely understand the sensitivity to police and enforcement and agree that maybe D and E do not have to be. Sorry, I spoke a lot, but.
I remember my third thing, so the third thing, that Lisa kind of alluded to was that there are situations where the police have to respond anyway, and, I don't know that it's helpful to call those out and even call attention to them. I'm also curious which of the stakeholders specifically were insistent that enforcement be in the policy?
Literally every person that we talked to. Every other group outside of the city said you have to make it clear and there has to, I mean, that was the entire county group that we've, like, people that work at, even it was like DSS and all of the public, any public safety responder, because they want to they want to be able to help people understand what we're saying is allowed and what's not allowed. And what the consistent messaging was is that what we're doing now is essentially just looking the other way on what you've said a couple times tonight, which is camping not allowed on city property, right? So basically what we've been doing is saying, we know it's not allowed, but we're just kind of turning the other way and seeing what happens. And that hasn't been working for everyone. And I think the rationale to focus it on land management policy was because that would help us articulate different kinds of uses for city property while we put all of these other pieces in place that we don't have in place.
I guess how do I do it? For my part, repeated assertions of what the policy is not looking the other way. So that's it. I'm not as hung up on the word enforcement as, some stakeholders feel like it has more strength, and that's fine. And also, if we can't agree, I still think, like, my recommendation is to leave F off as well. However, if we can't agree, and then you propose DE is, some reasonable for me.
All right, we also had a discussion about whether or not a citation would even be meaningful. So I don't think anyone on the working group would fight very hard for exactly what is written here. I think what we did, the consensus that the working group came to was that we needed something that demonstrated a method of how we would work to move someone to a space that was a better use of city property for camping than in a space that we've identified as a different kind of, we're trying to use it for something other than camping.
Okay, so Phoebe, and then I'll ask if anyone else has comments, and then.
I kept hearing this piece about people, you kept using these examples of who has, told y'all we need to use enforce, we need to use it. There are words like manage, there's words like co-work together, there's words like co-op, cooperatively, there's many words, and the names that you use, the DSS and social workers and different are all from systems that have abused in the past, right? So to use those examples set off something in me that is very uncomfortable, that you have people sitting down saying what happens when these words are used. There are many words to say pretty much that we need to tell people, right? And it's not that it hasn't been enforced or it hasn't been, people have turned a blind eye to it. It was not necessary to do it. And because some people are saying we need it enforced, we needed it done. So what I'm saying is, and I'll say it clearer as usual, is that we are talking about a population of people who are at their lowest, some of them, right? And so wording, the use of who we send in there, all this is very, very, very important. And I might not even be using, proper language and stuff like that myself, but what I'm saying is, we're trying to be like making sure, so I mean, what I'm saying is, nobody mentioned specifically, but when you said DSS, when you said the police officers, when you said certain areas about who decided the enforcement and other things is needed, it says, okay, where were the people who will be, who are lived experience? Did any of them tell you that's what they needed? And I think they are the most important. Yeah, that's enough for me.
Thank you, Keith. Anyone else? Okay, go ahead, Tiffany, and then Dorothy.
I guess I just want to ask again for a little bit more detail on the stakeholders who were very insistent that the word enforcement be used.
So we can, well, let me try and be more articulate. I was trying to say things quickly. So I think everyone would be comfortable if we found some other word other than enforcement. I think that would be fine. We were challenged to figure out how to word this in a way that was very hard to write a city policy with the language that is required for a policy, but then add some of these other pieces in. So what we heard from outreach workers and people who provide support services and human service agencies and people who interact with the population, as well as administrative offices in the county, was maybe not necessarily you have to use the word enforcement, but you have to be very clear about what's allowed where. I think that's really more of what we heard.
And what's going to happen.
And what's going to happen if someone is, we've said also is we have successfully managed don't camp in certain locations very easily, and other, we also struggled with, if we were to label all the red zones in the city, including parks and all of these other places, like then it was just like this would just look like a big giant blob of red, right? What we're really trying to address is what the language in the beginning of the policy says, which is where we have kind of use conflicts, right? Because again, this is a land management policy. It's unfortunately not a compassionate human policy. And we're trying to interlace those two things here. So it's not that, I can't go through a laundry list of this person said that or this person said that. The sense of what we heard was if you're not clear, very clear about what the city wants and doesn't want, then no one will be able to help you or support you. No one will be able to work with this population to connect them to the services that they need if we're unclear about what people are allowed to do. That was a much longer, less articulate way of trying to say that. This
You started with the word administration.
Yeah,
And
and
everybody
everybody started
said,
with
"What is that?"
administration and
Yeah.
people didn't understand.
What about the clients?
We are open to all suggestions. That's all I would say.
Tiffany, I think as a follow-up, and then I promised 4 days, and then I want to pause this for a second.
I guess ultimately, again, my biggest issue is not with the word enforcement, whether it's enforcement or a word that would materially mean the same thing. I just, again, want to echo that I would like to see this circulated with the D, E, and F removed. I think that the purpose of this, the purpose of this bill would be contradicted by potentially escalating the situation by sending police officers in. But that being said, maybe I worded my question a little wrong. I just wanted to know, because I feel like there has been constantly like, rather than citing, agencies or groups or what they were saying specifically in claiming that, everybody says, we need to use the word enforcement. I'm inclined to believe that it's important to use that word. I just want to know more specifically who is saying it, because I feel like right now it's a very vague everybody and a reinstatement of what the bill is saying, which, you've been doing a great job saying. I just want to clarify.
mean, if the group would like to see that Lisa did an excellent job of taking really detailed notes every time that we met. We have a giant Excel spreadsheet of this is the group we met with, this is the summary of what we heard, this is group, we're happy to circulate that around. That's not, I mean, we can have those materials. I'm not sure it would say anything differently, but there's no reason to not share that information with everybody, as well as kind of what we used as to tease out themes that we knew we needed to address in the policy. So that's easy to share if you want to really drill down into all of the details of that. That's not a problem at all.
Yeah, I'll just be brief, and I appreciate the supportive comments from Devin Co. Echoing a lot of what Tiffany just said regarding you know, the points of like enforcement and whatnot. I don't want to see the policy that we've worked so hard on you know, go to waste, and I want to see it move forward. I want to deliver, you know, on those concerns regarding urgency and whatnot. So I do think, based off of what we've been hearing from those folks in the committee, the removal of D and F and maybe replacing it with something clear about like city staff and whatnot, and maybe we have to work that out more and further conversations. But I think if that's the big linchpin, that's what like folks are stuck on. I think removing it so that we can move forward with it makes the most sense.
Okay, I'm gonna let Cynthia go, and then Phoebe, and then I'm gonna apologize, really.
So in my experience, and I'm thinking whether or not we're dealing with, you know, outreach workers or rangers. Like, we have individuals who are out in the community, they're there for support services, education services. And in order to do that, you know, it is good to have like a clear delineation of what the relationship is. I think especially as an outreach worker, you want to build trust. You want to build support and have a clear line of what your job is as an outreach worker, not an enforcer. Right. And so maybe what's missing in this is sort of what we touched upon earlier, is that it's a co-response as needed, ideally with reliance on emphasizing the relationship and support, not the law enforcement side, but recognizing that you do sometimes need somebody with the authority, but it's that person. I'm here talking with you, and this person is here because I recognize that they may need to issue a warning or a citation, but I'm going to work with you to try to avoid that. But here's this person here with this job. It's not me as the outreach worker, as the person interacting and wants to build that relationship. So having that clear difference of role and responsibility, but recognizing that there is still a role. I mean, Dustin, you remember, you know, years ago, outreach workers coming in mass to council saying the importance of law enforcement that enabled outreach workers to do their work. And it was from every department, recognizing their role and their value and their expertise, not necessarily being the first person or the main person interacting, although they sometimes were, but to be there as part of the process. And so maybe highlighting that these are team efforts, that we don't want to confuse the role of an outreach worker to be enforcement. We don't want to confuse other staff to be enforcement, but there is clearly individuals with that power and authority as necessary. You know, again, I'll use a different scenario, but a very similar one. We used to have gorge rangers that would be out in 6 Mile Creek. A lot of activity in 6 Mile Creek. We would have activities, parties, lots of people, many people who did not want to stop doing what they were doing. And we had outreach, or we had gorge rangers who had no law enforcement ability or responsibility, and frankly, put themselves in danger trying to keep people safe and guide them to more appropriate behavior. And it was just, without law enforcement there, we couldn't ask them to intervene. We couldn't, it wasn't safe for us to ask them to take that responsibility. And we had to have a clear delineation. It's not your responsibility to make people do the right thing. It's law enforcement's responsibility. And we did need to use law enforcement to come in and change the behavior because it was becoming very unsafe. And this is a natural area, there was devastation, and, all of these other things that were going on. There is a role for law enforcement, and I think it would be an error to take it out of the policy, but I do think providing more context and how our intent in utilizing this as a supportive, as necessary mechanism that might be available, but should be included, to not eliminate the very true reality that there are going to be individuals who will not comply without a law enforcement individual there present. So I think perhaps elaborating on this and expanding on it with our intent would be helpful, but I don't think it is, again, I'm just going back to Gorge Rangers and 6 Mile Creek, which is similar. I think it is unreasonable to think that we can really effectively have a policy that doesn't include law enforcement in some form.
I guess I've not been told this many years ago, I see the world through rose-colored glasses. I really don't see, well, to be honestly, our presentation is always very important. The way we present this will be the most important. And so, I hear everybody's input, and I just want to see it, people in a situation where they can get to a better place. And how we do it and what we bring across is very important. Presentation, very important. And who's presenting, also very important, and how they present it. So for me, I just, and sometimes I need to step back and not put my personal, what would work for me in, because I'm just looking at, that's it, presentation.
Okay, thank you. And Mike, there might be an opportunity, but let me just try to summarize some things and get us to a point of maybe moving forward, right? So one of those things is, for me, it wasn't as clear in the policy about the way we might utilize the right of staff. So I think there's an opportunity to clarify that. And I think I'd suggest that we maybe do that in a way that allows us to not only talk about who we currently have, but who we could envision being those staff, and maybe even take it a step further, because one of those people may end up being police. But we might go further to suggest that there's a hierarchy, right? That these are the people we expect first, and then maybe down that chain, so to speak, or along a certain continuum, it might be police. And that might be because there's a role that they have to play as law enforcement, that they have to go into these situations. Maybe it's to help with someone who's not an officer. But I think that will maybe make it a little clearer, so that when we, and this is where I'm trying to move us forward, when we go to circulate this for input, that we will be more true to what our resources that we have available are. And that there may be a DPW worker that plays that role. There may be a fire department. I mean, there's a lot of different staff members of the city that could end up in a role like that. So I don't want to pretend that's not the case. So I think we should be truthful in that regard, but also try to get people to give us feedback about this with an understanding of what our intent is. That it's not, say, police are the first level of response, when we're just giving someone a visit and a verbal notice to say, this is not, you know, maybe you'd like to be over there, right? So then I want to talk about that next thing, which is how and whether we move this forward for circulation. And the whether we've been sort of talking about, but the how, I want to understand based on what the process is. You know, how we move it forward. Can we move it forward in a way where the draft might be a little fluid, right? So that we can invite that input, or do we need it to be more solid so that it could be adopted as is? And so I want us to get to that pretty soon, because that's where we're going next. And then when we do that, I want to talk about a timeline, but I'll save that for later. So I don't know, Mike, if you want to can build on that in some way. You're on all comments.
We summarized it pretty well, and I wanted to also thank Cynthia for the example of the gorge rangers. And you know, there does need to be some sort of conclusion or some action. So when we start progressing down a, you know, trying to get people to move, there needs to be a connection at the end. Otherwise, the time is just wasted. You know, people will go out and talk first time, the second time, the third time, and then do they just throw up their hands? And I'm not saying it needs to be police, but there does need to be some sort of action. And right now, you know, as it's simply described, it's not necessarily for policing action, but just some sort of authority at the end of the line that says, look, we've asked multiple times nicely. There needs to be an action, and you know, we've even talked in the group that, you know, maybe the action is more intense work from social workers. But you know, there does need to be some sort of conclusion to it. And the one other thing I wanted to say was on I know there's been some talk about the red zones, the green zones, and things like that. I think part of the thought of having the amber zone right now is we do need to see how this works. Right now, we have one red zone, and we're still trying to figure out how to figure that small little space out. We had one camper there. We went out and talked to them. And they moved. They complied within 24 hours. We have another campsite out there. The person's never there. What do? We've gone out multiple times to try to talk to this person. And what we're afraid of is when some people see a tent out there that's not being moved, other people will start to think it's okay to camp here. And so we do kind of want to, you know, keep the red zones red, but we still don't even have that one small red zone figured out right now. And I think the idea behind the amber zones is that those could become red zones next year or the year after. But I would just caution about putting too many red zones in right now, because we're just having trouble with that one kind of red zone right now. So just about.
Thank you, Mike.
One last question. And so for as long as I can remember, y'all have not enforced this, right? And I thought it was what I was thinking. It hasn't been enforced for as long as we all can remember. And I'm just like, what is this great push now, right? Is it because of the homeless, right? And maybe that should have been a question I should have asked a while ago, but I really know why. But I'm just saying, why all of a sudden this great enforcement thing when it hasn't been enforced for forever?
That's a good question. I think part part of it is it's really escalated over the last couple of years and to a point where a lot of these campsites are extremely unsafe. And there is a danger and there have been deaths out in the jungle and things like that.
If you think it's dangerous now, I sat down and listened to some history. This is a piece of cake. No, I'm not gonna say that part, but if you know the history of the camping sites that has been throughout the history of Ithaca, it's always been, anyway, okay. That's another thing, but thanks for giving me the update that it's gotten worse over the last few years. Thanks.
Yes, Mayor.
Thanks, Rob. I just want to reiterate some of the points that have been made, that this is a pilot. It's a one-year pilot. We're not going to get everything right. We're going to learn through this process. Circulation means there will be opportunity for other staff to provide input, and that's what circulation can provide for the committee and for council as a whole. I also want to say that we are building out staffing capacity, and a number of you have referred to this. So the co-response, the unarmed workers, the community outreach workers who would be more specifically city staff, that is something that is being discussed and has been mentioned. The homeless outreach coordinator, that position needs to be built out. Another point to make, and Jorge made this point, and I fully agree with this, one of the things we and many other communities do need is more housing. And we need permanent supportive housing. We need affordable housing at the lowest income levels. There are a number of housing developments in process, in development at the moment. That doesn't solve our problem, or the issue and the challenge today. It is something that will be coming down the road, and I fully agree that we need more housing, but we don't have it right now. And as others have said, there is an urgency. And part of that urgency, Phoebe, to your point, is that there has been a growth in encampments. There's concern about safety. There's concern about health and well-being of the community as a whole, those who are camping and those who are in other capacities in the community. So there is some urgency, and I would really appreciate this being circulated so the committee and the council as a whole can get on.
Thank you. So I want to bring us back to the circulation idea and how. So I assume that there will be things that, as we collect information from people who are reviewing this, that it will allow us to bring back ideas that can reshape elements of the pilot policy. Like one, for example, is the mayor just mentioned this is a one-year policy. It doesn't, I don't think it says that anywhere in this. It does say it'll be reviewed periodically. It doesn't say how exactly. It doesn't say on the timeline. So things like that might be information that comes back and says we should do this. So how much of this, how is this ready to go for that kind of, you know, with the idea that we're going to invite people to comment on these and we're open to changing them. And we say it's good as is with some of the feedback we've given you specifically about what is currently being called the enforcement protocol.
Meaning removing DE&I.
I think that was that, maybe rewriting some of the way who might be responsible for those, maybe not limiting it to a specific number, so a way to keep it flexible and fluid enough to invite input around that. Is that possible?
I think it's possible. It's possible, certainly. I don't know what how people feel about taking the responsibility to come up with a new draft without it being approved by this committee or, I mean, approved for circulation by this. We need to go to the board. What do you think? Do we feel comfortable rewriting it and then based on these suggestions and then sending it out for circulation, or should it come back? Because these are pretty detailed discussions and yeah.
I think D and F. D, E, and F of the enforcement policy, and that's what we've been wrestling over for months and months on this. And so if we're gonna get rid of those, what does that replace by? And I mean, we could spend the next several months trying to figure out how to replace D, E, and F.
I mean, I thought part of our conversation tonight was perhaps to extract from at least D and F, extract from them the specific identification of police. Right? But somehow write somewhere else that city staff, which might include a variety of different types of staff, might play the role of doing those activities. And I don't know if I'd stop at 3. I don't know if I'd necessarily even get rid of something like a written notice. But so if there's a way to write that that's kind of fluid, that invites input so that when we circulate this, we can get some ideas from people about what they might support or how they think it could be improved. Cynthia, could.
Again, I think expanding on D, E, and F and how the role of law enforcement in conjunction with other staff as a secondary and ancillary role, but retaining the enforcement role. I really caution again in putting in a enforcement role on another class of employee, right? In terms of like, I don't want fire, DPW, building, you know, if they have a certain accessibility that you want to preserve, right? So I think the role of enforcement is important, clarifying how it will be used sparingly, but where it lies appropriately, but not confusing other people's roles, because there's a clarity there that obviously has a value to us, and we don't want to inadvertently dissolve that clarity by commingling that job with an enforcement role. So, and again, I think, you know, outreach workers as well, like they have support going into situations with the security and stability with them that they don't carry themselves. And, you know, so I think that clarifying it, having it as a support to another individual, but also clearly explicitly saying the role that it has is important to maintain. Because then again, what's the point of the policy? What is the policy going to do?
So I'm trying to understand what I'm hearing here. Is it as simple as just saying, as simple as just saying, get rid of D, E, and F? And the policy goes forward.
I think revising D, E, and F, putting it in a larger context of other individuals who are going to.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's eliminating it. It's like, how do we dovetail it with a different structure? But eliminating law enforcement entirely from the policy, I think, will be very problematic.
So does that help?
And maybe I'm the only one who thinks so.
All right, so Lisa asked, I think Lisa asked this question. I can't remember now. So do we ask for this to go back and be rewritten and come back to us to discuss that it's ready for circulation? Or do we circulate it, and do we need to direct, pretty clearly write that now on the floor, which could get messy? Or do you have enough confidence in what we gave you tonight to be able to massage what's there and circulate it without coming back to us? And I'm gonna look forward a little bit because we're gonna have some challenges with next month's meeting. At least two of us won't be here. So there's a little question mark about whether we're actually gonna be able to hold a July PEDC meeting.
Hey, Rob, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
You said this is more a protocol question. Could you do something where you bracket that section or highlight it and you could say flagged for removal or something? Like if the committee, I don't know, if you're trying to get people that are reading it, I guess they're probably not necessarily watching this meeting, so they haven't seen the struggle with what this could be. So could you do something like, I don't know, we may or may not want to remove this section. We would love your specific feedback on this part. I just don't know the protocol for circulating.
Yeah, that's
and
what I'm-
if that would make it worse or give
Yeah.
muddled feedback back, then would be hard for the group to use moving forward.
Yeah, it's a good question. I also want to put it in the context of, let's say, we don't have a meeting in July, or we're not ready to circulate now, so that feedback doesn't come back to us in July. We'd be looking at getting something out, not until back to us as a committee in August, which means it doesn't go to council at a minimum until September. And that starts.
Then you're back in code blue.
Yeah,
We're back in
That's
code
next
blue
year.
when the problem goes away.
Really have a whole nother year to deal with it and modify it.
so that would be a reason why, if we could put some trust in this idea that let's take what we have with some of the changes that we discussed tonight and put it out there for circulation to get feedback, and maybe highlight areas that we would really welcome that feedback more than others. And then see where we go, and maybe ask a smaller committee to receive that feedback in July, so it can get to the August council meeting somehow. Not sure exactly how yet. Yeah, we could.
I will say, and I don't know if the rest of the committee agrees with this, but given the amount, given the different opinions and not a consensus here, I do not feel comfortable rewriting this and sending it out on behalf of planning committee. But I would, if we could flag things and say, I wouldn't feel comfortable speaking. I haven't gotten a clear enough idea about what you want to replace this with, or how to reword this, that I would feel confident doing that on your behalf and then sending it out without your review. That's my thing. Do you feel that way? So I think we could do what Deb was saying, where we flag things and say, this is particular area that we particularly want feedback on. And I think doing it graphically would be much better than writing in a memo that people aren't going to read. And I think graphically, having it right in the policy, this is what these are areas that we have disagreement about or concern, particularly want comments on. I would feel more comfortable doing that if you want to circulate it now. Otherwise, I would want the committee to look at it again. We can try to incorporate what you said, but I would want you to look at it again. That's how. Do you disagree with anything you disagree with?
No, I think it should come back.
Yeah.
Especially because that's, again, those D, E, and F, without those, or without a suitable replacement to those, I would say we don't even have a policy.
And I mean, I think that there's also other areas of the policy where the police are referenced, so, you know, I want to make sure everybody's aware of those areas. In fact, in C, the police are referenced. So, so do we change that? Do we, it's a lot of little changes, which are fine, but I just think if we want to circulate it, those are the two options. Come back the next available meeting with revisions and have you look at them or flag as flag.
If I'm thinking through this correctly, circulating it now with that notion of flagging things has the potential to move this along faster. So I would endorse that idea.
It of course it depends on what feedback you get
True.
from circulation, but I do have some concern about delay. So flagging areas where this committee has raised questions and would specifically like to bring others' attention to and provide feedback on would perhaps be helpful in moving things along.
But who feedback are you looking for? Is it the people who are gonna be living in these or in the red zones and different things? Like who feedback are you looking for is a question.
Well, that's a good question. I mean, we have a standard circulation in which we send it to all city staff, any interested
Okay.
parties to the, but we can expand that if that is a, you know, if that is your guidance, we can certainly expand it to, people who don't normally circulate, but of course, anybody on the list that we have talked to, we would want to include in that sort of thing. So anybody involved with this, we want to include.
And we did ask some of the like community outreach workers who have relationships with the population to also get feedback. So that could be something we specifically ask too, is that I hear what you're saying, that the people with lived experience would be helpful in helping us get this right.
Yeah.
For sure. And so we're having a couple of meetings just on different topics with people from the county, and we're having a review of the community outreach worker program, so we could very specifically say, please get feedback from people. Because I mean, there was also talk of how would we implement something where we were involving people who are living in these areas to even help with this policy as well. What could that look like? I mean, that could be something else that's written in. It's just a challenge to imagine things that we think would be better, but not having that infrastructure in place in order to do it that way. And I think that summarizes the struggle of writing this entire situation, because we don't currently have the resources in place. And maybe that's a reason to say, let's focus on putting those other resources in place before we focus on the land management policy. I don't know. I mean, it goes back to your question of why, which is a reasonable question, like a why now question. So it doesn't mean this work was for naught. It just means that we've got parallel things in the works and they're not meeting each other at the same time in order for us to do everything the way that we really think it should be done and be done the best.
Well, I'm sorry. No, I think that this all is great, and I think the only thing, it should go in circulation, but I think the circulation should be the people who it's gonna matter the most to say, okay, no, I don't care what Phoebe said, that don't bother me, kind of thing. I think right now, maybe they are more important, if their input is more important than anybody, and, you know, I know of someone who would probably say, I look it over, I don't, yeah, that what I'm saying is, because I mean, to delay any longer if, and I trust y'all enough to say, if you say, yeah, it's gotten worse and we need this happening, then delaying it would only do one thing, but delay it. So, yeah, I think getting their input is more important than anybody's.
I would like to see this policy go forward and us try to make progress in its development. I will highlight again, this is not a policy that deals with safety. To your question as to why now, I will say that my first year, I walked through the jungle by myself. And I wasn't afraid. That's how I met Carmen Weedy, was walking through the jungle. I was walking out and he was walking in. And he tried to introduce the rescue mission to take over the Red Cross. That is not the environment we have right now today. It is, I think outreach workers rely on law enforcement and need law enforcement partnership in order to do their work because of the safety issues that we are facing in the encampments right now. My understanding, which again goes back to if we want outreach workers, they need to be city paid staff. My understanding is there are no outreach workers going out into the encampments. They have not gone out into the encampments for weeks. For weeks. So that means the people who are unhoused are getting no services, no outreach, no support. Because of the safety issues that are occurring in these areas. So I'm glad we're talking about the land use policy. This is great. I'm going to keep coming back to we need to address the health, safety, and welfare of our residents who are unhoused, who are in jeopardy every day without access to services, without access to security and support. They don't have access to porta potties and trash and everything else. So I would like us to make progress on this. And I do think that it is, we need to recognize that law enforcement and outreach workers work together hand in hand to support those living unhoused.
Good.
I hate to keep going back and forth, but this putting fear mongering thing in the air, like I come from a community that, wait a minute, let me slow down. We want safety, public safety for everybody, no matter what. Let's be honest that we are not only concerned about their well-being, we're also concerned about the store owners, the businesses, and also the people who live in that community. And I think you sort of said that. Listen, the fear part don't work that well on that community. How unsafe it is, right? So I just think if we, let me shut up. Okay, good night. I shut down.
Well, thank you, but not for shutting down, but for speaking up. But so we were not specifically asked to vote on this request to circulate, but I think there is a request to circulate. So I think if we are going to move this forward, we're going to do that with some of the guidance we've given you. And if we don't vote to move this forward to circulate, then we're just delaying this again and a minimum of September before council looks at it. So let's not do that. I'd like to encourage us to vote to circulate this, and we'll give as much guidance as we have tonight. I hope that's enough to help you and also the group, maybe, because it's not just on you to hear that feedback and mark up the document in a way that can be circulated.
I would like to motion that we vote to circulate the policy as written with graphic highlights of areas that are specifically under consideration that we are looking for feedback and support from the community, specifically on areas of concern that have been identified tonight.
Okay, so there's a motion. And if somebody wants to second that,
I don't know, to be honest, I'm very reluctant, I'm also like, I'm spent right now. That's it. I don't. Yeah, I guess I'm somewhat willing to circulate with highlights, but, I would prefer another draft come for us in some way. Whether it be email or if we find a way to meet in July. I know it's not possible, it's our fault that we can't meet on our normal day, so my apologies, but this was planned for a year, my absence in the way thing.
Like, interject a question, do you want to spot CA and PEDC?
won't matter.
It won't matter. Okay, I'm just putting.
Me,
it
it won't matter, yeah.
Same here.
But that's.
Yeah, I mean, I don't usually do this, but can we get an email, passed via email, circulate contingent upon, at least a written check off via email.
I think we could circulate it for our own feedback, but it probably would need to be a committee action that would actually vote to circulate it. We wouldn't be able to do that via email. So that puts it to next month. So we're a little out of protocol here because there's a motion on the floor.
Right.
And we're discussing it, but no one has seconded it.
I'll second it.
Okay, so we are discussing it.
Well, we were discussing it way before.
Yeah, we were discussing it before, but at least now it has the ability to say, vote on it if the discussion shifts us in a direction. Yeah,
I guess we'll get a circulate if the circulation reflects the fact that there are areas of broad.
yeah,
Because I don't even frankly agree with the premise that without an enforcement mechanism, we don't have a policy. I just don't, I just don't agree with that. I think that there is a city position that we can articulate repeatedly, and that has value. It is truly ineffective. It's something we can revisit, which we've said all right anyway, and that we're willing to revisit, modify, and evolve the plan as it goes along. So I guess in short, I'll skip as long as again it reflects like in some way, whether it's just highlighting this area and saying where we need some substantial feedback. We spent crap all the time talking about it. However, professional way that one actually cuts that.
We have a policy now that we so we already have a policy.
yeah, good one. Okay, any other thoughts on that before I ask us to vote on the motion, which is to circulate the current draft policy with some of the flagged ideas that we discussed? Right, okay. And what we can discuss it, go ahead.
Yes, I thought Lisa said that this would not, that doing that flag piece thing would not be, you wouldn't be able to right now. Like you're fully not understanding exactly what you should be flagging or something, I don't know, maybe I got it wrong. Let me hear you.
I said that I didn't feel, because there wasn't consensus with the group or even general agreement, I didn't feel comfortable personally, and I think it was corroborated by the group, to rewrite it based on your feedback.
Okay.
I would only feel comfortable flagging things. And I feel like if we flag, which, you know, again, we can wait and rewrite it and bring it back to you, either way is fine with us. But I feel like if we were to flag things or somehow graphically depict what we really want feedback on, I could send that out to you before I send it out and say, did I get everything? Or should we add any, does anybody want to add any?
Okay. Lisa, what are those things that are gonna be flagged? I've got 3 on my list, but I'm not.
What I see right now, thank you, is C, D, E, and F of the enforcement. But also we need to go up to C, because C says, you know, may lead to involvement, to inform people that may lead to involvement of the police. We need to flag that. Down below, where it describes who would do these visits, it also says members of, if the police department may be requested to conduct site visits, that would need to be flagged, because either they can conduct site visits or they can't conduct site visits, whether or not they are giving warnings. I'm not clear where your position is on that. And I think the word enforcement, and that does not surprise me.
The only,
To flag the word enforcement, is this the right word to use? Is this how- Do you have anything else?
the only other one I had was there seems to be some, not necessarily disagreement, but some confusion over the green, red, and amber
Amber.
zone, and what should be in those and why.
Yeah, that's true. That is very true.
Mike, are you saying specific areas that we were asked about tonight about whether some should be labeled as amber, or are you talking about
That's the category.
the category?
The categories and also some of the areas.
Got it, okay.
That's true.
And what we're able to do even for this first year. And like I said, even if we have amber areas shown this year, maybe those turn to red next year, but we're, like I said, we're still just trying to figure out what to do on that one little red area right now.
Right. So, the areas that have been flagged by members of the policy or the group seem like they've captured what we were talking about tonight. Are there any other areas that we should articulate? Otherwise, I feel like it captured what we were focused on. So can we then vote to circulate the document the way we've described it in the motion?
Just have one question.
Go for it.
I just wanted to ask, and this might not be something you have an answer to right now, but do you think that there's any way you would be willing to, if we circulated it with the flagging and there was a lot of agreement that we should scratch that section of the enforcement section? Would you be willing to reconsider it? Because it seems like the feedback we've been hearing is that, you know, the belief is that the meat of the bill, the only thing differentiating it from what we have now is the enforcement clause. It seems like, do you think that is as fundamental to the meaning of that?
Yeah, and I would agree with what Cynthia said earlier. We have a policy right now that's not enforced. And so if we scratch any part of the enforcement out of this, I'd say we're back to square one, to be honest. I mean, we put no candidate signs up in all these areas, and they just say ignore it. I mean, we've done steps A, B, and C already.
And we rely on outreach workers to guide people to other locations.
But my concern is that if we're voting to circulate flagging these disagreements and there's not a willingness to compromise on this one point, because it seems to be the entire meaning of the proposal itself. Is there a point in circulating it if it doesn't seem like we're gonna get past these disagreements?
I guess I'd say one of the reasons I'd like to circulate it in this way is that even though we've put some amazing minds on this, there may just be one other person who sees the disagreements that we've been wrestling with, who might come up with an idea that somehow bridges those disagreements. And so I think that's the whole point of circulating, is to get that input and then use that as a way to shape the policy that is now in draft form. And if that helped us, then I'd say it was absolutely perfect.
Well, to that too, like I said, I don't necessarily need D, E, and F to have police involvement, right? There needs to be some actionable step beyond us constantly reminding people that they need to move. It's what's that next step? Is it police or is it something else? And again, we've talked about this in our meetings. If it's not police, what is it?
Yeah, I should go back to what Ted said earlier, where it just may not be, may not have pieces of it. And so I think that's where I'm at. That's it, for the reasons Rob said, I'm fine with circulating. To acknowledge I'm exhausted and distracted, but I do think there's a part of me where, to Tiffany's point, that we may be at an impasse and, I think it's fine, too. It's something that is fine, but also learn from the process.
All right, so I'm gonna ask us to vote on this. Are we ready? Okay, so we're voting to circulate as we've described it. All those in favor? Okay, it looks like it's unanimous.
I was there with you in spirit, guys.
Unanimous plus. Yeah, some of us had 2 hands up, so. it's unanimous.
We will graphically
Yes,
do something graphically to this to show what are the areas of disagreement, I don't want to call it disagreement, but areas that we need the most feedback on or have the most concerns. And I will send that out to you to make sure that we've gotten it.
okay.
Does that sound?
I think that would be. Okay,
Before it is.
Before it is circulated, so we
Yeah.
make sure that there's, because I don't have any, I think it's perfectly reasonable to just keep marking it up with the same, but again, I don't feel like the group could speak for. exactly for the-
I guess the only other thing to consider is, I think there's some rules around how long it has to be circulated.
Well, I mean,
Just want to make sure if there is some intent to bring it back to the July meeting, that it's in.
we will make sure we comply with.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Yeah, guess what? We're not done. We still have April minutes.